Hello and welcome to The Way It Is. I'm your host, Barnard Sims. I thank you so much for tuning in with us this evening. We have a special guest, but first I'd like to remind everybody to comment, like, follow, subscribe, and definitely share because without you, there's no me. And we can keep this content going and keep the conversations going. And we invite all comments. We navigating, working with trying to pick up the comments live, but please comment, chime in. We have a great show scheduled for today, um, and again, this is the way it is. But today we have a special guest, young man. His name is Terry Lee Watson. He's the founder of Strategies for Justice, where Mr. Watson helped pen Senate Bill S7209, which is called Carrier's Law, which is a revolutionary bill that is needed in police, the way we police in America, all across America. I hope we can get into that. Mr. Watson is also a professional speaker, author, trainer with more than 15 years working in higher education, 25 years providing workshops on bias discrimination, generational trauma, and confronting racism. That means doing something about it, not just talking about it. And as Assistant Director of Student Disability Services for Penn State University World Campus, Mr. Watson has been presenting the battle with Moses' people since 2014. Mr. Watson is also the host of the web series Moses' People Speak, the battle, and got a book coming out that's pending publication. We won't talk about that, but the battle continues with Moses' people. But the book that he just wrote, I would say just wrote. I don't know what the publication date was, but I've read it twice. It is that good. I think as you read the review on iBooks, it was like it's a mind blowing documentation. It reminds me a lot of the nuances of W.E.D. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folks. But his book is called Welcome to the Sick Mind of a Sane Person. I'm going to say that title again. Welcome to the Sick Mind of a Sane Person. Deconstructing Racism and White Supremacy. And so, in the words of my brother from Georgia, Shannon Sharp, after reading that introduction and meeting this young man, all I can say is, wow. Yeah, Shannon Sharp said, wow, after he say that. And
You
after
know what
reading
that
your
means.
book, he's from Georgia, so I know what he means when he say that. But brother, I'm not hyping you up. These are my notes from reading your book last night. Again, and my mama was like, "You reading that book that fast?" I said, "Mama, if I'm ever on Club Shay Shay, I'm gonna tell Shannon Sharp I broke Cat Williams' record last night. I read over 3,000 books in one night, Shannon." So I just want to hear him say, "Wow, wow, Skip." He the goat. LeBron not the goat no more. Bernard the goat. He brought, but I had to take comedy break. But
Yes.
brother Terry
Yeah.
Watt said, "Hey man, thank you for tuning in. It's an honor and a pleasure to meet you and talk to you again. Always."
Absolutely. My pleasure for being here. I think we had a great time in Kentucky. And I think, it's really a powerful moment when we had a chance to present together on the banned books in times of division. So, really happy to be on this show. Yes.
And I appreciate you for carrying me doing that with bad books in times of discussion. Because when I'm in those settings, my interview is definitely not about me. But when sometimes I'm in those settings and I see other cultures trying to hijack the narrative of, I guess, belittling our experiences in America. And I go
Hmm.
back to when Martin Luther King said, "Nobody has been a slave on American soil
Yeah. Yep.
like the
Yep.
Negro has for so many years." So let us heal us, and we heal each other as we all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It was definitely a good moment. And the cool thing about being able to have those types of spaces is hopefully we can open up people's eyes to seeing a truth that otherwise it's been ignored. Um, but yeah, it was definitely a blessing being on that panel with you, uh, and having those discussions.
And when I talk about your resume and everything that's going on in it and your book, I want to start like at the beginning because you are actually operating in what you reference in the book, that fifth note, that of inspiring people to challenge
Yeah.
this system. You have actual pen legislation that can change the dynamics. But I want to
Yes.
go back to before you found your fifth note. And what was it
Mhm.
like for you growing up and some of the influences that inspired you to be this inspiration you are today?
Yeah. So, and again, I'm a '80s baby, right? So, when we had a different, and it's sort of the that forgotten generation, right? Where most people just breeze over that group. And so, for me, growing up in the '80s, I sort of was one of those kids that was very observant about the things around him, and I sort of captured this a little bit in the book too, as well. Is when I started looking at reflecting on growing up in the '80s, one of the things that stood out to me was sort of how race was talked about, right? And how race was described. And, um, when I was in school, grade school, they had me in special ed, right? And one of those things that came out of that was some of the thoughts on how black kids were seen back then. So if you had attention problems, you were in special ed. If you had a behavioral problem, you were in special ed. It doesn't matter, you know, you were in special ed. And it was interesting because I was brilliant, and I'll say that word brilliant in a sense, academically, right? So I excelled in mathematics. That was my strong point. Um, I excelled in sciences, another strong point, and in writing. Those are my strong points, right? But here I was in special ed, and again, I say that because not to say anything against special ed, because there are elements of me having a disability that reason why I was there. But the other part to that too is being able to see how black folks were treated back then in education, and that experience progressed all the way through college and beyond, right? And it was funny because I did put in a book one experience, maybe two experiences from colleges in college, but I took one out. I took one experience out of the book because my goal was to keep the book short as possible so people can get through it, right? And also I want to make sure everything I talked about was relevant. So get this, Bernard. I decided to remove a section from the book, and I was going. I kid you not, because I'm writing book number two right now, and this is my binder of the actual original transcript, right? And I was going through it, and I came across that writing, and that piece that I decided to remove was about affirmative action, because I said to myself back then, before publishing, no one's going to be talking about affirmative action over the next 10 years.
Wow.
And so now I'm kicking myself in the head because I'm like, if I had my crystal ball working at the time, but it was my reflection on a situation that happened when I was in college, and when I think back at that time where one of the teacher assistants told me the only reason why I was in college was because I was black. That was what she said to me. Not because I was intelligent, not because I belonged there. No, because of the color of my skin is the reason why I was admitted to be at this university. And I had a really, let's say, not anger, but definitely I was very disappointed in that statement. And when I reflected on that time, and I wrote about it, it was definitely challenging this idea that affirmative action is been put in place because I was unable. No, affirmative action was put in place because I was able, but because of the systemic racism in education would keep me out. That's the reason why affirmative action was put into place, right?
Right.
And so this concept of growing up in a world where you see racism in different aspects, I was like, the first book I'm gonna write about is going to be based on those reflections, right? Just documenting what I've seen, and like I said in the book, what I also hope to see in the future. And that's what got
Mm-hmm.
into that fifth note, right? For those musicians out there, understanding what that fifth note, everyone know that fifth note is very, is dominant. First of all, it's a dominant note in the major
Mm-hmm.
scale, right? But it's also that one note that, like I said, it sort of help you prepare for what's to come. And for me, I like to work in that space because I'm a strategist. I like to strategize. You know, if it's not looking at legislation, it's looking at policies and procedures. Whatever it may be, I like to strategize. And for me, that always best way to describe it is that fifth note. So yeah, I'm always living there. I'm always living there now. But it was definitely a journey to get there for sure.
Now you grew up in
New
I'm
York,
New York.
New
What
York.
what part?
I'm originally born in Queens, but then I moved to Long Island. So I was mostly raised in Long Island, so in Nassau, uh, and that's where I went to school at. Um, and it was interesting because I didn't write much about my Long Island experience. Most of the things I wrote about in the book came from my Queens experience. Um, and there's really no reason why I left Long Island out. It's just that it just didn't. When I was reflecting on some of those powerful things in my memory, definitely was mostly about my time at Queens. But yeah, But I grew up in. I was born in Queens, raised in Long Island, and then I went to the University of Maine. So I literally went like as far north as you can go in the state, and that was definitely an experience by itself.
But now I want to give some clarity on some up your upbringing. I didn't know when you was writing the books where you was the characters like in school when you talked about the teacher, the lack of diversity. Were those you or were those characters you created?
No,
Like,
that
could you?
was me. Yeah, that was me. So funny enough is that when I wrote those parts of the book, my editor, the editor was like, uh, it would be really powerful if you do this in a like a storytelling narrative way. Because
Right.
originally I wrote it as me, I, right? Then I changed it to the boy. And matter of
Right.
fact, one of the oldest writings in that book, because I that book was a collection of writings throughout many years that I just put together. One of the oldest pieces was called Crack Bottles, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
remember I don't typically change my poems. Those are the ones that don't change, except when I originally wrote it, it was my perspective as growing up in the area around crack bottles. But when the editor got to it, they changed it to this. They're like, "Hey, you should consider doing this narrative." So I read it that way, and I understood exactly what he was saying. I was like, "Oh, you know, people, people who reach out to me now asking about the book, they typically ask about who's the boy, right? Who's the boy? Is
Right.
it someone that you know? And when I was shocked, I said, no. That every time you see the boy is Terry Watson, right? That's the boy. It just I took it because when I wrote the book, a lot of the other stories that I share from historical perspectives, obviously I shared it from a narrative perspective, right? So they sort of editor like would be really powerful if you kept it that way, and he was right because I think it sort of makes a different stance, and people also could put themselves in
Yes.
that space, right? I had a couple of black men, and specifically black men, reach out to me and say, I read the book, and I remember things like this. You know, I remember, being in the school system and experiencing this. I remember even even some of the analogies I made in the book, they reach us. I remember being in those spaces and having those feelings, and the way you describe it, it's like those are the words I wanted to say back then, but I didn't have the words to express how I was feeling. And that's always really powerful to me when I get folks come to me and say, "Listen, I've I felt this. I felt
Mm-hmm.
this either anger or feeling of being lost or whatever it may be. I felt that, and I just want to let you know that I experienced this feeling too, and that's a powerful thing. Yeah.
It is, and when the way you wrote it, I mean, every black boy I know has that same story at some point in their life. You know, in the Malcolm X movie, when he wanted to be
Yeah.
a lawyer, and the teacher's like, "Well,
Yeah.
you can do some other job. You can't, black
Right.
folks can't be a lawyer." And I had that experience, and that's why it was so relatable and powerful. But and I just did, I was trying to save some of the book, but the book was, I got too many notes on the book, brother man. But some of the things that you said that I think that we need to hear is like your take on the reason those systems survive is we're programmed for humility, being humble, not
Hmm.
to God or deity, but to men in some state. And
Yes.
I'm like, that really sparked me. I'm like, that's how people like R. Kelly can be successful for so many years, because we
Yeah.
so humble that we dispel our logics and wits and send our daughter off with this, you know, you know,
Hmm.
pervert.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Yeah.
so can you expand on that a little bit about the
Yeah.
lessons you learned on humility?
Yeah, and I'll start by saying I'm a person, and I mentioned in the book, who always talked about the importance of being humble. Even
Mm-hmm.
in that chapter, I was talking about the conversation between my son and I, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how that was passed on from really from my grandmother to me. And one of the things I realized is, well, my son helped me realize, is that we our humbleness, us being humble can also not allow us to be authentic too.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that too, and you mentioned one of it, right? Besides giving ourselves to God, we put our trust in men, right? And
Right.
I got and I'll tell you right now, there's someone said to me before, it's like, listen, I have never doubted God in my
Mm-mm.
life. So,
Mm-mm.
but I have doubted some of his representatives, right? Or so-called representatives, right?
Absolutely.
you know, and I think part of this thought about being humble and showing humility is important, and it still is, right? I still in some way tell folks that gotta practice that humility piece to be able to see other people outside themselves. But I also realize that it could be a double-edged sword, right? When folks get to the point where they are and Langston Hughes put it best, right? Humble, meek, and mild, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes when we get to the point where we be so humble, or we try to be so humble, that we're willing to put ourselves in danger, not
Mm.
physical danger, but it's mental danger,
Mm-hmm.
and those spaces where you now find yourself trying to say, like, how did I get here, right? That's what I'm trying to warn people about, is especially when you're dealing about racism and white supremacy and those two different entities, that if you're a person of color and you're trying to be your authentic self, please do so, right? And there's times to be humble, but not when you're trying to be yourself. When you're trying to be yourself, you need to make sure you are authentic. Tell your stories. Tell your
Right.
stories, right? That's one of the most important things that a person can do. Um, and I said this also in the book, is like, I am I am not naive to think that racism is exclusive just to black and brown bodies, right? But it is my black skin that I'm telling the story during my black consciousness, right?
Right.
And so it's important that people realize that, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier, is like, when we're trying to have a discussion about blackness, there's times for those discussions, and they have to take place, and we got to be we have to be like the ones that lead that charge. And that's the reason why our books, and I would say our books, yours, mine, we were talking about the brother earlier today, um, your boy. That's
Yeah.
why our books are so important,
Yeah.
because we need to make sure that there are spaces for those narratives.
Right.
Yeah.
I say this all the time on this show, because it's important, because the African proverb says the story of the hunt only favors the hunter until the lion shares the truth.
Yeah.
And so, and something you said in the book. I don't know if this was a reference you made, or it was a reference to Langston Hughes quote, but you said, in a sense, humbleness requires silence, and silence is not an option for people who remain invisible.
Hmm.
Now I don't
Yes,
know,
yes.
was that you or Langston? 'Cause I'm like, this brother. I'm gonna go
So
back to Shannon Sharp now. Wow, wow, Skip. I tell you, boy, I almost
uh,
jumped through the window when I read that. But
yeah, I tell you, it's a combination of folks actually. So one of and I think I somewhat gave reference to Langston Hughes in that particular chapter because of the Humble Meek Mile poem that he wrote.
mm-hmm,
But it was also a combination. There was an interview. I'm not sure if you saw it or not. It was interviews between Nikki Giovanni and
James Baldwin,
James Baldwin. Yes,
James
yes,
Baldwin.
yes. And I remember the interview so vividly because it's also something that's repeated, I think, over time. Let me explain. So Nikki was very young in that interview. James Baldwin was a little bit seasoned. He's a little bit older, right?
Mm-hmm,
And even though they're experiencing the world together, I think there's always a time in which our elders have a different perspective on how we get justice versus the
mm-hmm,
young folks, right? And I watched that interview, and that's what I saw. But there was a moment in that interview where um, Nikki Giovanni says to James Baldwin, because they're talking about he lies to you. He lied to you because he loves you, right? He's like,
mm-hmm,
she's like, no. He goes, I don't know. He goes, I tell you the truth because I love you. And she's like, what do I need the truth for? I need you to lie to me and treat
mm-hmm,
me with love and respect. And I think part of that conversation sort of stood out to me when I was thinking about that because we are so, and we know this right now, people will hold their tongues at work because they
mm-hmm,
don't want to lose their jobs or what have you. Now they'll hold their tongue in different spaces. I would share a story about when his book came out. One of the cool things about his book is I had people reach out to me sharing their stories, and I remember one lady shared their story with me how when she was in a church as a young girl, they wouldn't let black people become members of the church. She was white, and they wouldn't let black people become members of the church. And as a young girl, she didn't understand why. But as a young girl, she was also silenced because who was she to challenge the church, the pastor, or in this case, her grandmother, right?
right.
Um, and again, it got me thinking. She kept silent and she didn't share that story. And get this, she never shared that story until she shared it with me almost 70 years later. You see,
Mm.
and so I think about this conversation about this humble and being silent, and then also because of the silence, we can't afford to be silenced because we will remain invisible. And if we remain invisible, then the generation that comes after us
Mm.
will reap the trauma of that invisibility. And so I'm really always looking at ways to get people understand what the unintended consequences of being humble in some cases or being silenced when it's calls for you not to be silenced.
Right.
Yeah.
And just to expand a little more on what from my perspective of what you're saying, it's not being humble to, my parents have never told me to do anything wrong.
Right.
So I'm humble to that. But if
Right.
some dude's on the corner telling me that he finna go rob the liquor store and he just need me to sit in the car and watch for him, I don't need to reduce myself to, like you
Yeah.
said, endanger myself mentally and actually physically in that example to
Hmm.
humble myself to things that are not divine. And so
Right.
that's I want to make sure people don't misunderstand what I'm saying and take it as it's this arrogance, but it's again to go back to the quote that you said. Humbleness requires a silence for people who remain invisible, and to kind of pair that with what you said about being put in certain classes in school. You think about in today's society or in the 80s or when I came up in the 70s, uh, like you think about Prince. He was in
Hmm.
school and he had all these abilities and all these,
Yep.
notes and stuff, fifth notes floating around in his head. But then they
Yep.
want us to sit in a standardized classroom, and but the teacher was mindful enough to say this kid need to go to the music room and get all that out, and then he'll come back and do his homework later. And we
Yeah.
have the genius that we have because he didn't
Right.
have to humble himself to a system that really wasn't in order for his
Hmm.
gifts.
Right. And that's really important, especially when and I remember the first interview that I did, and it's funny that this one chapter people comment on quite often. Even in the first interview that I did, the host mentioned when he read the book, this particular chapter came up as the first line of questioning, and he pointed out the statement that my son made. Right, is if I am capable, then why do I have right?
Right.
Then why do I have to be humble? And I think it's important. And again, to reiterate what you're saying to Bernard is that I am not saying that humble is a bad thing. Right. I think in humbleness, like I put in the book, humbleness has its time and place, right? It does. I am humble quite often, but it's through that humbleness that I also reflect on. I want to make sure that I am passing on this concept of healing and not harm, right?
Hmm.
Um, I just after our time together in Kentucky, I was doing a talk in Phoenix, and it was with uh, a black and well, just black and minoritized students in general, and they are all these students in STEM. And
Okay.
I read the chapter Wanted from the book, and there's a paragraph. The way that Wanted reads, it reads as you're not wanted, and as it progresses on, it reads to you being wanted, and the point is on you making yourself wanted, right?
Hmm.
And I read that piece to these students, and there's a part about I say eggshells, crush all eggshells that's around you, even though those eggshells are wanted, right? And
Hmm.
I remember the student messaged me after the talk, and she's like, I needed to hear that today because I felt like giving up. And this is what I get to when I talk about the humble piece, is because I humble myself, in different spaces. I allow for authentic conversation, but also authentic reflections to take place.
Hmm.
And if someone is saying to you as a black person, as a black man, I need you to be silenced for me to feel safe.
Right. That's
That's not where we're at today, right? We're not going to do that,
right.
right? And I think the concept, especially for, and I'm always thinking about obviously the young folks. I'm thinking about my son, he's in college right now, so I'm always thinking about the young folks who are coming up and what possible mistakes I've made, and I'm hopefully not they don't have to repeat those mistakes, right? So I give that information, but I also know that they also have their own challenges that we growing up did not face,
Hmm.
right? I I I I I think what is quite often is we did not have constant media in our face. When we were growing up, news came on like twice a day, and if you wanted news outside those two news times, you had to read a newspaper, which was like really small print, right?
Hmm.
And most of us growing up, we were like, all right, we're gonna play outside, we're gonna do everything, we're not gonna read a paper and whatever. And we weren't constantly bombarded with information. Oh,
That was me.
that was you? Okay.
Yeah, I just enlarged.
I like that. So we were bombarded by this constant information, but at the same time, and we weren't given all this information that was going to make us, be so divisive. But because of that, I know that that's a challenge that the new generation face. But there are some elements in when we talk about racism and white supremacy that has not changed, and that it's just been adapted, right? And so when I describe this concept of white supremacy, and people get this mixed up. When I talk about white supremacy, I'm not talking about white supremacist, right? That's a different conversation. When
Right.
I talk about white supremacy, I'm thinking of it as a system. And when we look at this particular system, it its ability to change and adapt and evolve,
Hmm.
so it can be sustained, it has to be recognized.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the one thing that our and going back to your original question about of humbleness, I think that we can't be humble in calling it out. We have to say, this is where I'm finding racism. This is where I'm finding these elements of white supremacy, and here's how I'm going to make sure you are aware of it. So yeah, that's important to me. It really is.
And again, go back to Shannon Sharp. Wow, that is wow. Hey, but that in the South, I call it shrinking Negroes. Like we're
Mm,
in settings where we have every right that anybody else have, but we will forego that just for comfortability. I'm telling
yeah.
you, as a barber, I've been cutting a guy's hair who worked uptown, and he
Mhm.
has, and this not just one incident, but it's just, it's. He told me I have to vote for this Republican because my boss man is a Republican. And I'm thinking,
Mm,
man, when you vote, there's nobody in the booth. But that's when you're
yeah.
doing this play on the sick mind of a sane person. Welcome to the sick mind of those are things that we wrestle with. I
Yes.
myself have difficulty with that too. I used to go into meetings with the NAACP and I noticed we all used to sit in the back of the room at a school
Hmm.
board meeting. We don't have to do that anymore. But we will
Yeah.
so want to be humble and light that we will forego our rights. We have every rights that anybody else has, but we will
Yep.
forego them. And that's really not the way to get liberation. I'll go back to two things you said that piqued my
Hmm.
interest. When you talked about the conversation with James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni, I wanted people to really grasp that
Yes.
she was saying he go out to work, the man,
Hmm.
and he
Yes.
smiles all day. Even though he's not happy with the lashes on his back and the job promotions that go to somebody else, and he laughs and he smiles, yes, sir. I've never been to a slave plantation. They didn't tell me these were good Christian white folks that own these people. But then that man comes back from that brutal world to his woman, and she gets the worst of him.
Right.
And so she was
Yes.
saying, lie to me like you lie to them white
I
folks
do.
uptown. You smile
Yes.
at them all day, but you give them all that, and then you come here and you unwind, and I get the worst of you. So lie to
Yes.
me. And you
Yes.
even in your book you made an apology to as a
Yeah.
oh, well, I'll let you explain the apology. The last one it was powerful to the black community.
uh, yeah, the apology of the unapologetic black man. You know, I gotta be honest with you. When I wrote a lot of these things like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, right? You know, long
That's when the
days.
spirit. That's when
That's
the
when it
spirit
hits you.
moved.
You know,
Yeah.
some people would ask me, "How did you come up with the apology of the unapologetic black man?" Well, you know, but yeah, and I did put that in there for yes, that particular whole poem actually. The apology to the black man, the apology to the white man, the apology to the white woman and the black woman, and I broke it down that way because it was so important to me at that time too when I wrote it. But when I did the apology of the black man, I want to go through all four of them. Like I think it's important to explain how I got to the black woman.
Okay.
When I did the apology of the black man, I apologize in a way to say that if anything that I've done to make him feel inferior, because we do that as black people all the time. We would do stuff to other black people and pass on the same sickness
Mm-hmm.
that the oppressor would have us do. So we become in the same interview of Giovanni and Bolin, we in turn become the oppressor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I love James Baldwin. He writes that so beautifully. I believe it's the book I Am Not Your Negro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so when he's talking about how uh, at one point, as a kid, when there was the Indians versus the Cowboys, he rooted for the Cowboys until he realized that he was the Indians, right?
Right, right.
And I think that we have been brainwashed just to do that. We've been brainwashed to root for the things that actually cause us more harm. So when I wrote the apology to the black man, I was thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, an apology to the white man is a very similar concept, right? Is if I made you think that your impression of me
Mm-hmm.
was significant to my worth, I made a mistake. I made a mistake in making you think that was the case because it's not, right? Same thing with the white woman, right? If I made you feel like my stance of beauty to me and my people, right? That your opinion to that is important to me. I apologize. But then when I got to the black woman, that's exactly what I was thinking about because I think I used the words the greatest apology I reserve for you, or
Yes.
something along those lines, right?
Yes.
I might I'm butchering
Yes.
my own quotes, aren't I?
Yeah. Just hey, go
Right?
there.
But I put that because I think that historically, and I want to say historically, and I want to include part of now as a history. I do think that we have um, to black women have really made some true damage, right? We not just the beauty standards, but also from the concept of what we bring back to them. And again, Nikki Giovanni, I was just saying I just read her poetry book. I think it was called Cotton Candy in the Rain, something like that. I always forget the names of books and stuff, but it was a really powerful thing. And she's and even in that book, she talked about choices, and I read that, and I was like, man, what a powerful, powerful woman, you know. But when I talk about the apology to the black woman, it was acknowledging one that for so long they kept the standard of blackness in our
Mhm.
community, right? They kept the idea of what it means to be black, and right now you look at some of uh, the most progressive, um, uh, outspoken individuals in our community is the black woman, right?
Yes.
The most educated is the black woman, right?
Yes.
And even with all of that, I want to make sure it was understood that I recognize all that greatness, but I also recognize that we as black men may have caused trauma even in that space. And like I think Giovanni said, they got the worst of the brunt of us being so on un, so being so not ourselves, not being authentic, and then trying to come back home and be authentic now, right? And and
Right.
and really, it just again it adds to that what I call the sick mind, right? You're
Right.
passing down the sickness. But yeah, that was one of the most I think out of the poems that I wrote, that was probably one of the deepest ones, just because I think it was actually following I am unapologetic. So it was sort of breaking down that whole um, idea of being unapologetic, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and then I wrote his apology letter right afterwards, right? And so, um, but yeah, I think that's important. And again, a lot of it's taken from the concept of some of our great writers in the past.
And what you just said is so powerful and it's strong and it's true. When you did the rundown of the black woman in history, some of our, uh, Sojourner Truth, Harriet
Hmm.
Tubman. These are women, and then they get the worst of us. And even to pair it to today's time, you look at what's going on. I don't know if you know what's going on in Atlanta with Fannie Willis. Here's a black
Hmm.
woman
Yeah.
who whatever she was going, she being attacked personally for having the
Yeah.
courage to indict a president. And people
Hmm.
don't realize the threats that she's constantly under in that position, but she had the courage to do it. And then when she couldn't get Roy Barnes. Roy Barnes was on the stand. He was the former governor. He said, I wouldn't take the job because it's too dangerous. But so she had to find the nearest person she could who would stand with her. And I think as a
Yep.
community, we have not
Hmm.
done enough to support her. It's like they used to
Yep.
do, like to take the strongest Negro out there and beat them in front
Hmm.
of everybody. So we don't have any more bad Negroes to stand up to
Yeah.
speak truth to power. And I think that as a society, we need to galvanize ourselves around this lady, and like your book said, at least apologize to her for not having her back
Hmm.
the way we should.
Yeah. And this is what always bothered me and is that we like to wait until it's safe before we speak up. Does that you see what I'm saying? Like and I want let me talk about Carrier's law for a second because this is a great example, right?
Okay, okay.
Carrier's law based on Carrier Horn. I was a police officer in Buffalo, New York, who stopped the choking of an African American man. Now, me and Carrier were friends,
Mm-hmm.
and after George Floyd happened, um, she she uh She was very upset. Like most people in the country, very upset, right? And she's like, if uh if we had carriers law, this would never have happened. And so I heard her put that out there on her YouTube page. So I reached out to her. I says, tell me about this idea you have called carriers law. So she tells me, and as she's speaking, I'm just writing it down. That's why I said I penned it, right? I'm literally writing it down. The spirit of carriers law goes with carrier horn. So I'm writing it down. And I did offer my 2 cents at the end, like, here's a loophole that you might want to look at, what have you not. And I remember she was giving a talk about carriers law, and it was during a pandemic, and I was in attendance, because I'm always supporting my sister, every chance I get, and she says something like, Terry's right here in the audience, and he can really um, speak to the power of carriers law, and it was all Zoom. So I unmuted my mic and I said, there are some times where a man needs to speak, and there's some times where a man needs to be quiet. And I muted myself, right? And everybody got what I was saying, right?
Right.
And it's because the power of carriers law was in the story of Carrier Horn, and at that time, at that moment, where people was listening to Carrier Horn tell her story, they didn't need a man to say, or what is it? What do they call it? Mansplain, right?
Right.
Mansplain
Yeah.
her story, right?
Right.
And I think that's important because so often, and this goes back to Martin Luther King and his great quote, is that we need people in love with justice and not in love with publicity and money, right? We need people in love with justice. And I think that when we talk about the importance of Carrier's law, it's really based on her story. The power of it, right, is based on her experience. The fact that she was fired, the
Mm.
fact that she was assaulted, the fact that she had to go through what she went through with her kids,
Mm.
the fact that she had to wait a long time to even get a sniff of justice. And it's still not, complete today. I think the concept of what we and I remember asking her this question. I was like, hey, where were all the other black officers when this happened? Where were the brothers? I know there were some brothers in the force, and I've talked to folks who was like, yeah, man, we support Carrie Horn behind the scenes. And no, we don't need you. We don't need that. We need you, and I want to excuse my expression. We need you to have the fortitude. Let's just say the fortitude. Let's be clean. Let's be PG. You need you to have the fortitude to speak when she needs you to speak, not
Right.
when it's safe to speak. And I think when I wrote that apology letter, that was exactly what I was really thinking about, was all those opportunities out there. And I'll tell, and people at my job knows this, especially the assistants at my job. I tell them, I'm not going to be in a meeting and watch you be disrespected, no matter what role I hold, right?
Right.
If you get disrespected in a meeting, I am going to say that was disrespectful. I'm not going to wait until it's safe for
Yeah.
me per se to say it's disrespectful if you're being disrespected. And I have in a couple of times been in those situations where you know I would say, listen, we can't do that today because what you're doing is not going to happen around me. And that's what we need more of. We need that to take place. But again, you have to be able to get to that. You have to run recognize that space exists. I
Yeah.
think right now, even now, people have a hard time recognizing that space exists. So
Yeah, that's it's funny when you say you went to the other cops and they like, Adam, where art thou? It's
yeah,
like,
yes,
hey, we with her, but we're not, we're afraid because in what carrier law does is it helps people who speak out, like the people, everybody
hmm
that I know from down here was watching George Floyd and like, why don't the other
yeah,
officers do anything? And it's
right,
because that culture, I it has become corrupt. I don't think in inception, because when we used to play cops and robbers as kids, the cop was the good person. The
hmm
robbers were the bad people. So everybody wanted to be the cop. So I don't think nobody gets into police officers to be the bad guy. But what
hmm
happens is it's more beneficial if you see something wrong, like with the George Floyd. The officers were afraid to, I guess, same thing as gang culture, go against the code. Well, what
Mm-hmm.
Carol did is she saw something wrong and she did something about it, and then she
Right.
was persecuted and lost a pension. I mean, a whole lot of things. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure she got threats and for standing up for what's right, which is what police officers are supposed to do. That's why I say that
Right.
piece of legislation you help pen is revolutionary, and I know we need it at
Right.
where I live at.
Yeah. We
We
trying
need
to
it across the country.
and we trying to spread exactly we trying to spread it too. And it was interesting because now when I think about the book I'm working on right now, it's my in-depth conversation with police officers about race, and and I think about some of the folks like Cario, a good example, who did the right thing when it was needed,
Mhm.
right? And in doing that themselves, some of them got threats. Their livelihood was put into question. One was even called a Judas. Um,
Mm.
you know, and I think about this conversation around police and race because, like you said, the policing in itself is supposed to be a noble profession, right? No one goes into policing with the idea, or hopefully, no one
Hopefully.
goes into policing with the idea of, I am going to be the corrupt cop. No one, for the most part. There's an element in which you have to identify as a police officer what type of officer are you going to be, right? And I'm fortunate because I get to do a lot of training with police officers, and I do question them in that regards. I say, listen, you can be. And I tell a story about a bike, and this did not make it in a book, so I'm thinking, no, there. This is one of the stories I've actually removed, actually, because I tell it so often that any story I tell over and over again, I removed it from the book. Um, so when I was a young kid, I had this bike that I bought my first paycheck, right? And the first, the first night, how the buddies, you're like, hey, you got a new bike? Let's go for a ride. So we're going for a ride with a new bike. And as I'm riding my bike in the neighborhood that I actually worked in to earn money for the bike, get this, I got hit by a police car.
Wow.
And not sorry, I'm not a police car. I got hit by a car. Sorry, not a
Okay.
car. And it totaled my bike, knocked me over, right? And well, there was a police car that was sitting right there on the corner and saw the whole thing. And the police officer came over and didn't say, "Hey, are you okay?" Didn't say. He says to me, "What are you doing in this neighborhood at night?" That was the first words, right? Now,
Oh.
as a teenager, a black teenager of a pretty big stature too, because as you know, I'm a big dude, Bernard, right? So, I know. So as me knowing this, I never responded to the police officer. So he looked at me and he's like, he got back in his car. He drove off. The person that hit me in the car, the guy in their car, and they drove off. No police report, no nothing. Right. And I literally walked my broken bike all the way back home. I fixed my bike up. Never was the same because once your bike get hit by a car, it doesn't that's it. But I try to fix it up. I took the same bike to college, and I was riding the bike around. A police car pulled me over, and of course, I'm now far away from home, right? And so my brain, I go back, oh no, I bring back to me all the thoughts of being in New York. This police officer gets out the car and she's like, "Can I help you?" I
Wow.
says, "Well, I'm looking for Kenneth Beck. I'm looking for I think it was Kenneth Beck Hall." She says, "Okay, throw your bike in the car. I'll give you a ride." Dude, same bike, two different police officers, right?
Right.
And I say to them, which officer do you want to be? Right? You have a choice. Every time you interact with someone, you have a choice which officer you're going to be. And I became good friends with, and her name, I'll shout out, her name was Sergeant Debbie Mitchell, police officer, the good one, the really nice one. And we were friends from that 17-year-old kid to the time I got my master's degree, right? And I remember during my graduation, my family saw me hugging this white police officer. Like, who is this? Who's Terry hugging? I had to explain to my family. This is Sergeant Debbie Mitchell, man. She's down. She when I was 17 years old, almost 8 years prior, right?
Right.
And she saw me with the same bike. This is what she did. She gave me a different perspective on police officers, right?
Right.
But every officer had the opportunity, and
Right.
I think that when I talk about police officers that violate that, and especially when it's targeted towards black and brown people, as a police officer who witnessed that, or may even, you have an opportunity to be, a carrier horn, or you could be someone that sit by and watch it play out. But I want to say one more thing though, and when I'm talking about policing, is that and this was highlighted this past year with Tyree Nichols, that the color of the police officer sometimes don't make a difference,
Mm-mm.
right? And I've been saying that for years, right?
Right.
I've been saying that for years. In my book, I just talked about this in my book, the Barbie dipped in chocolate, which that's actually a true statement I made at a police conference. Um, and I remember one of my friends was a sergeant. He was like, you could hear a pin drop when you said that. I says, it's a, I had to remind folks, that because you have a certain color of skin doesn't mean you have the consciousness within, right? And I was
Mm-hmm.
saying that years for years. And Tyree Nichols happened, and people were shocked that it was five black officers. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why are we shocked about this? Why wait, what's shocking about that? Because they at that those five officers have made a decision who they were going to be,
Right.
and and by not by being looking like us, people perceive them as, as diversity high, what they want to call it. But because they look like us, they figure they won't never, beat up on a black man or kill a black man the way that they did. Well, why wouldn't they?
Right.
Because it's the culture that we're looking at is not the skin tone. Um, but yeah, so the carry load is important because it's hopefully it's going to interrupt those type of actions.
And to go back to what you just said, when people ask why would black police officers treat a black citizen in that way and basically kill him, that's just like asking why did black people catch COVID as well as
Hmm.
white people. Racism is a disease and it
Hmm.
affects all of us in different ways, but it's
Yes.
really an acknowledgement of a caste system to where we
Yeah.
call each other the N word and degrade our
Hmm.
level of humanity. So when those police officers saw that guy, they saw
Hmm.
someone less than. But if that was Justin Bieber, they would have took a picture and gave him a ride home or asked him what's like the officer asked you, officer friendly asked you,
Yep.
are you
Hmm.
okay? And so
Yep.
it's a dynamic that you explore a lot in your book in finding
Yes.
solutions to racism. But
Yes.
really, what I want to definitely touch on is you talk about the reason we don't resolve racism because America has been practicing malpractice and a misdiagnosis. So will you expound on that for me for a
you
minute?
know that I you know what's funny is I would say this too.
I
Uh,
told you, I read your book. I
you
read
you
it
really
out of
you really did.
3,000 books in one night, Shannon. I'm like Cat Williams, bro.
Yeah, I was doing research with a colleague of mine, and I could get to answer your question. I was doing research with a colleague of mine, and we were really describing, um, the Six Sigma analogy, and what does that look like for businesses and process and procedures. And so when I was doing that research with him, um, I started thinking about that in terms of racism. Right. Now he uses a great way to describe this. He describes it as going to the doctor, right? And he describes it as, when you go to the doctor, they ask you this question, and he talks about this process mapping called the MAIC, right? Shout out to you, Dr. George Trino, if you're watching. um, and I've heard him tell this the MAIC story like 100 times. I'm like, man, I could tell it myself now. Like, move over, George. I got this right. I can tell the story myself.
Right, right.
And so while I was writing this story, I was trying to think about how's the best way to describe the malpractice of racism, because we in America do that so well. I mean, I got to the point where I said that I can go into the room, and I can go into a room with 100 people, and I'll ask the question, "Are you a racist?" And I'll get 100 people trying to tell me ways they're not racist because they all have their own idea of what that looks like. So when I talk about the malpractice of treating racism, first of all, it's not diagnosed correctly, right? And in a book, I describe treating racism as going to the doctor, just like my buddy did, right? You know, and you go to the doctor. If you were trying to get a treatment to racism, you go to the doctor. First of all, they won't recognize that you're sick in the first place, right? The second part, if they was even to recognize that you were sick, they would give you all the reasons why you should not be sick, right? You should have took the flu shot, or you should have did this, or you should have did that, right? And when we talk about racism, I get to the point where I say, well, you know what? If you look at all the race literature out there, and this is the reason why I will say I didn't read any of the books that was up to date on race literature until I finished my book because I didn't want to be influenced by other
Mm-hmm.
authors, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I first finished my book, I went and started reading all those books that came out past 5 or 6 years, and I realized they all had the same exact thing. They talk about racism in this parallel system, right? Either you are or you're not, right? Either you're anti-racist or you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, 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 no. Racism is more complex than that, right? Way more complex than that. And I said, if you're going to talk about systematic racism, you're going to get pushback automatically because people don't understand what systematic racism is. And I said to the, if you think about systematic racism, let's take that term for a second. If you look at a system, Bernard, how do you know a system is working? You know it's working when you don't notice, right? You go to your car right now, you put the key in your ignition. If it turns on, you don't care about how it turns on. You know that it's on, and you go to drive away. When do you realize you have a problem? When that car doesn't start. Something in the system now is not working, right?
Right.
And you think about racism in this concept. In America, we have been turning that ignition, and the car's been starting, right? It's been starting, right?
Right.
This is the reason why you can have something racist happen to you right now, and people will come up with all these reasons why it's not racist,
Yes.
or why the impact is not as great as you think it is, right? Because it's been misdiagnosed. When I went to Phoenix, and this is the first time I did this. I went, and you probably read the chapter called uh, "Why Does Racism Prevail?" Asking for a friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then right after that chapter was the I describe racism in its five different I call it the spectrum of racism. So I went to Phoenix and I put the spectrum on the wall, and I asked students, about 150 students. I'm like, okay, I need you to now put your interaction. Where does that fit in those spectrum of racism? And in as those students went to that board and started putting their sticky notes on there, it showed that racism is not as simple as either you are or you're not, or you're anti-racist or you're not. Racism is a system that if it's working the way it was designed, you won't notice it,
Mm-hmm.
right? You won't notice it. And your friends won't notice it, or your people, your community won't notice because it's working the way it's supposed to work. It's only when you have a disruptor, no,
Mm-hmm.
your Martin Luther Kings, your Malcolm X, your John Lewis's,
Your
your
Terry
Fannie
Lee
Lou
Watson.
Hamers,
Your Terry
right?
Lee Watson.
That's
Yeah.
when they notice something is not right. And you point out those systematic things, and I've done this before. I said, you walk into a community, and I love doing community work, and I'm actually looking at doing some more work very soon in another community. You walk into a community, and they will have, we're not racist, and here's the reason why. We have this black politician or this black chief, and I already described to you what I think about that, right? So or we have this new group that's going to look at diversifying, and I say, okay, I've got kicked out so many hiring committees because they were like, we practice diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't know when I'll say how, and then we can explain how. So you got to take that statement out because it's not true. If you're practicing it, you would know how. If you don't know how, that means you're not practicing. You might wish to practice it, but you're not practicing it. And I think when we start looking at racism in that way, that is in a system way, but being able to explain what it means as a system, because people just raw term systematic racism don't know what it means, right?
Right.
And they'll say, "Well, I," I and I'll tell you one more thing. They whenever there's an issue of racism, what they typically do is look for another black person, and let's say, oh, if it's a situation of black, they look for another black person to say why it's not racist,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's what's going to happen. I'm going to look at another black person and say why it's not racist, and because that black person is not racist, then it can't be racist. This happens all the time.
All the
The-
time.
And, I pick on the Dallas Cowboys, and again, they don't need to be picked on, but Jerry Jones was found to be in that picture, the sit-ins, right? And what wound up happening? All his old black players came to his defense, like he can't be racist because he employed black people. Well, I'm like, hey, back in the slave times, they
Yeah.
they employed black people too,
Right.
right? Doesn't mean that they didn't believe they were inferior though. And so this idea of racism, it has been misdiagnosed, and I think until we diagnose it correctly, you have this is the reason why we can't talk about it, because we have people who have different perspectives of what racism look like, what white supremacy looks like, and because of that, they won't be able to discuss it in an authentic way. Um,
Yeah.
that's the reason why I think that we gotta really work on diagnosing racism properly.
Right. Now, a couple things you said there, and I know we were running up on the time, but I want to keep you here as long as I can while I got you. If you gotta go, just let me know. Uh,
No, we're good. We're good.
okay, because I appreciate your time, but you said so much there, and I'm like, man, I'm like Shannon Sharp. Wow, wow, wow. But you said, let me see, what was the point? It was like the cultural thing. In order for white supremacy to sustain itself, especially in rural areas like where I live, it
Hmm.
needs black bodies to survive. I mean, there's so
Yes.
many brothers running around here that they grew up in the projects, and nobody in their family talks like Blake Shelton. But you see
Hmm.
50, 60-year-old man talking about, hey, man, I got to be, hey, me and Billy Bob. And I'm like, brother, you wasn't talking like that in the barbershop. Why did you change your tone of your voice? Or these
Yes.
beautiful black women with beautiful natural hair with white women's wigs on their heads over in the courthouse. And then we go over there and then they won't even speak to me. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
We grew up together, or because Billy, Ray Ray got tattoos on his arm, then they won't speak to him. You know, they just looking
Mm-hmm.
down their nose at our own culture. So in order for
Yes.
white supremacy to pervade, they always have needed black spies in the community to come back and
Yep.
tell Massa what the Negroes are trying to do. And so,
Yep. Hmm.
but but what you said I thought was interesting. What two things I want to go to that I thought you said was interesting, because you said every time something happens racial, the white supremacist disease, I would say, needs a black person to come and co-sign and explain uh,
Hmm.
why it's not racist. And what my counselor at Asintech taught me was let white folks carry their own water. You know, we've been carrying
Hmm.
water for white folks, but every time I call the sheriff out, I call the mayor out. At first, somebody at the school, there's some black person that I've known all my life that comes, hey, Bernard, what are you doing? And I'm like, hey, why are you here? I didn't call
Yeah.
you and complain about something. And another
Yeah.
thing is, I bet you've never heard this excuse. When you do your exercise on what you said, you ask the question, who
Hmm.
believes racism still exists? Everybody raised their hand up. But then you say,
Yeah.
how many people in here are racist? And nobody raised their hand. So how can something survive without no carriers? And
Yeah.
so the reality is we're all components that carry this disease amongst each other, and we've been misdiagnosed until we deal with it and come to terms
Hmm.
with it. But I bet you've never heard this when you asked the question, well, why are you not racist? I bet you never heard this, because in the South, I had one of my friends at the store say, hey, Bernard, I'm not racist. I got a black cat. Now, have you ever heard that one up north? I'm serious, you know. I'm like, oh my God, this joker told me he had a black cat. Is is his disclaimer. And it is worse, you know. My sister's cousin's married to a black guy, and then we're friends with so and so, and Molly and them go to the skating rink. They don't go swimming with them though, but we still got all these covered pools around here in the South. But
Man,
you ever heard it? Those excuses are getting
not
ridiculous.
not the cat one. I gotta be honest with you. The cat one, that's a unique one. It was interesting to me too, and I'll go back to the first comment. So anytime there's a racial incident, and I'm speaking black and white. I know that there's other races and ethnicities to address too, but I'm only speaking to my personal experience, right? So, when every time there's a race issue between black and white, and I see that they will get a black person to either explain or co-sign on something like that. I always companies that have floated in my mind. Does it ever happen in the other way around? Like if a I have never, and again, I'm looking for videos. I've been looking for videos for a while, but a black brother, a brother messes up, and a white person comes on like, hey, this is really a good man. He is not a bad person. I want to see that flip the other way around, right?
Mhm.
And I give you a good example. And again, when in sports is great because sports always reminds us, one, that there is a hierarchy system, right?
Mhm.
But it also reminds us that race does still play a role, okay? And I remember you might remember the situation with Kyrie Irving. He
Mhm.
said some really uh, not so much, some anti-Semitic stuff that was definitely to be condemned.
Mhm.
And then when he said it, it was like everyone in the NBA, including people who he would call brothers, right,
Mhm.
came and attacking him. And I thought to myself, man, I get what he did was wrong, right?
Right.
But does it warrant that attack from all of you? Like
Right.
there were segments. They had full segments on TNT and BAT. They were
Yeah.
just talking him out. And I says, you all got his phone number, don't you? I know you got his phone number. Each one of you could probably call him and say, hey man, let's just discuss this offline. Let's talk about
Mhm.
what you just did. Let's have a one-on-one conversation and not air this dirty laundry into the world. All of them, right? And I thought about the same thing. I was like, okay. And at the same time, and I remember at the same time, the Brett Favre thing came out with the stealing of government funds.
Right.
All we heard was how good of a man he really was.
uh, uh,
It got me thinking. I'm like, and this is where I say that we pass down the sickness,
yes.
because it doesn't matter the person who's condemning or speaking out. And again, I'm all about speaking out when you see wrong. I believe, when Malcolm X said that I'm for justice no matter who is against or who is for. I believe that.
Right.
But I also believe that we have to be careful of one, who we are, who we're speaking to, who our audience, because sometimes we might be saying something that's going to damage us more than we ever know.
Right.
And at the same time, we got to be mindful that, when we talk about white supremacy as a system and how it's being sustained, you're right, it can't be sustained. And this is the argument that I made in the book, right? Which I said I knew I would get pushback from it, and I have, but it's cool. That white supremacy cannot be sustained just by white people,
Mm-mm.
right? They need
Mm-mm.
some partners to sustain
Right.
white supremacy.
Right.
And there's no better partner than the person that you're trying to oppress in the first place, right?
Yep.
And this is what James Baldwin warns us about. This is what W.E. Du Bois warns us about. Malcolm X, I mean Martin Luther King, all of them, right? I think about MLK because we just celebrated MLK a month ago, his birthday,
Mm-hmm.
and I watch all the politicians give us that quote. We all know the quote: "Judges by how the content
Okay.
of our character, not the
Yeah.
color of our skin.
Right.
I said,
Right.
do you realize what you're saying right now? Because I think if you even just listen to what Martin Luther King was saying in that quote, you would know that some of the things you guys are doing as politicians, you are judging us by the color of our skin and not by the content of our character. And they draw this line out there, but as in this is a token or a pass to be colorblind.
Right.
Martin Luther King has never said, "Don't see the color of my skin."
No. No.
Matter of fact, he has said the opposite many a times.
Right.
He was very vocal about saying that he was black and that he was proud. Right?
Right. Right.
Uh, he has never, in the history of being his 39 years on Earth, he has never told people, "Don't see the color of my skin." He said, "Don't judge me
Right.
by the color of my skin."
That's
But
totally
they
different.
took that, they took that and said, "Don't see my skin color," making us the invisible people that he protests against.
Mm.
And I think this is when I talk about the impact of white supremacy. And I said that if white supremacy was an organization, it would be a Fortune 500 company because it has amazing marketing. Has amazing marketing. I mean,
Good.
they can market. White supremacy is marketed through our own leaders,
Right.
through our own politicians,
Right.
sometimes in our religion, in our
Yes.
schools.
Yes.
You know, I say this because I'm again not being I'm not anti-American, right? I
Mm.
love America. And matter of fact, you grew up old school, right? You know
Right.
what our parents would say when they test charge us? I'm test charging you because I love you,
Right. Right.
right?
Preach.
If
Right.
if I if I don't love you, I'll let you do what you want to do,
Right. I'll let you walk in
right?
front of a bus.
I'll let you exactly. Exactly. It's the love of America that makes me say I need to identify when I see something and I'm able to identify it. I need to make sure you know about that. And I think
Right.
when we talk about white supremacy, because it's seen white supremacy get mixed up with white supremacists all the time. And white supremacist is someone who may actively practice to sustain white supremacy. But
Mhm.
that's only a small segment of that population that sustain white supremacy. You can sustain white supremacy and not even know it. And matter of fact, if I in the book I said the whole book is when I wrote the book, I wrote the book to answer one question. And this is probably the reason why I said that the reason why I call it what I call it. And the question that I attempt to answer in this book was, as a black conscious mind, how do I contribute to the sustainability of white supremacy?
Mhm.
That's a hard question to ask as a black
Mhm.
person, because especially a black person that says, "I'm here to fight against white supremacy," or "I'm here to fight against racism." When
Mhm.
you start identifying things that you may have done or maybe are doing that contributes to sustainability of white supremacy, that's what causes the sick mind.
Right.
And I think about this all the time. Everything I say, every interaction I have, when I am called in to say, "Hey Terry, this incident happened. What do you think?" That's the first thing that flows in my mind, is to make
Okay.
sure I'm not going to pass down any sickness, but I'm going to speak from the same mind.
And we have to be honest within ourselves in order to deal with the disease. I've been to
Mhm.
many churches in the South, and like you say, the institution of church, I think, in the South has probably done more to our to us damage to us psychologically, uh,
Mhm.
in conjunction with our school system. Because I've heard
Mhm.
preachers say, I worked for this man and he was supposed to pay me, and he didn't ever pay me. But I told my wife, don't worry about it. One day he will. And every now and then, now 30 years later, he come by and give us $2 or $3, and I'm like, wow. I'm like Shannon Shaw again, bro. You doing that's a lot of. If you work, you should be able to be paid. But
Yeah.
racism needs accomplices, whether they're
Yes.
black or white. To
Yes.
deconstruct racism needs allies. And in your book, I saw you talking about white people who will speak up on black issues in the black community. But what about when you go back to church when no one around? We got a lot of churches around here named First Baptist, First Methodist, First United, first this,
Hmm.
first that. But when something happens in our community, they the last Baptist, last this, last that, last to act,
Yeah.
last to say anything. And so, in theory, racism survives like alcoholism in that example. Like
Mhm.
if I got a problem with alcoholism, or in my white church I got a problem with alcoholism. Just imagine I'm white for a minute. I got a Blake Shelton tone, but and I'm in a white church and I got a problem with alcoholism. If you stop drinking, how is that going to help me?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
that's what I like when you not only, that's why I say you deviate from W.E.D. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folks, which is, 1903.
Tough.
I'm not judging the
Right.
man. Man wrote in 1903, but he was more like,
Yeah.
we need to assimilate, fix ourselves up, and then they'll like us. But yours was like, nah, there's some white allies. There's some stuff y'all can do in First Baptist, First Methodist,
Mhm.
First United that without
Yeah.
us around that can help us rid ourselves of this plague of racism. Could you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'll tell you exactly where that came from too. So I was I was dealing with a situation in my own circle that something very very blatant overt racist happened. Okay. Not like a microaggression, not like something tiny that you have to guess is a no, this was racist as racist can be. And it happened and I was having a conversation with someone, again, so something about me, Bernard, that I'll make it very clear is I talk to the person who cleans the floor as I would talk to the person that runs the organization,
Mm-hmm.
right? My tone's the same, my respect is the same, my directness is the
Mm-hmm.
same.
Right.
And I was speaking to someone who was, let's say, way above my pay grade, and we was talking about this. And I said to this person, I said, white people have to become more comfortable discussing racism and white supremacy with other white people. That's the best thing that you can do as an ally.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I know it's easy to be an ally in front of me, right? Because I mean, I'm going to sit there and smile. I'm going to applaud. I'm going, I got a lot of allies that's around me all the time, and in good heart and in good purpose.
Right.
But it's hard to be an ally when I'm not around. That's what I want to see, and because
Right.
I won't, and I shouldn't see it because I'm not there. But
Right.
what I need is for especially for our white brothers and sisters, right? They come and say, "How can I be an ally to stop racism?" Or "How can I be an ally to deconstruct white supremacy?" And I'm like, talk to your uncles, talk to your,
Preach.
whoever it may, right? Because I realized something, and this has happened in the election, the 2016, when President Trump was elected. Um, my white friends were upset. I mean, they were mad. They were throwing. I mean, he was just poof, cursing things out, throwing things out. They were upset. And I mean, I was like, I was perturbed too, but I was like, you guys are really upset. Like, wow, wow. And I realized something because you remember this. So the election happened, right? And then what happened right after the election? We all went back to Thanksgiving meals in our family,
Right.
and we came back to work. And I remember that some of my white colleagues were saying how much tension it was around the Thanksgiving table, right? It was, they were arguing with their uncles and their fathers, and there were nothing but argument going on. And I was like, man, that's not my experience at my dinner table. And don't get me wrong, but in my family we have Republicans and Democrats, right?
Right.
But that wasn't my experience at my table. And I got thinking, I was like, oh, you know what? You know why? Because in my family, we could discuss racism. We're without getting angry with one another because we can do that. And I think and to myself, I was like, if you are in a situation where there's so much anger and people are being, being evil to one another, it's because this is a new territory for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a new territory for you. So my response to folks was like, as white people, and especially in America, I can talk about other countries, but definitely in America, you have to become way more comfortable talking about racism and white supremacy to other white people in your circles when your black friends are not around. Because again, by adding the black friend makes it a little easier to do that, right? It makes it, you can look over to your black friend and see if they're agreeing with you, they're nodding their head, all that comes with it. When that black friend is not around, or that Asian friend, or that Hispanic friend is not around,
Right.
it makes it a different conversation. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think we running up on the time, brother. I got all kind of notes here about KSAASK and all that. Man, we gotta have you back on, cause but before we do get out of here, I definitely want to make sure we
Mhm.
give everybody an opportunity to follow. And how can people help you with your strategies for justice, and tell us where can we get your book.
Yeah, my book is available anywhere books are sold online. Like if you Google "Welcome to the Sick Mind of the Same Person," that'd be the first thing to pop up. Um, and to follow me, I think I thought I had my. Do I? I didn't. I don't have it up here. Let me pull it up here real quick. Hold on. That's weird. I thought I did. Okay, there we go. You can follow me on. This is pretty cool, by the way, Bernard. You saw how I did that? It's just popped it up there.
Okay. Okay.
You can follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. What have you not? If you scan that QR code, uh, I'm on different platforms. Always love coming to different communities to speak. Um, I'm trying to think. I'll be in Philadelphia in March, and I'll be in Washington, the state of Washington, in July. So hopefully, if people are around, I can definitely get a chance to speak to folks. But yeah, I love doing this work. It's like I said, it's tiring. It can be tiring, of course. I even wrote a piece about that. I can't afford to be tired. One of my things I actually read to myself quite often when I'm tired, just to remind myself why we're doing this work. You know, but I think that again, once we get to the point where we can have honest conversation about race, and then how to deal with it in our society, that's how we progress, right? That's how we gotta really progress as a people. I just think that right now people are misdiagnosed with racism and white supremacy, and it's showing the the uh, the uh, the consequences of doing that. So, and it's been so real over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
to me, being here and noticing people as the barber, we think that the absence of confrontation and conversation is harmony, but
Mm.
it's not. You know,
So.
when America had brought our ancestors over here in the bottoms of boat, they was in harmony about that, but they fought over
Hmm.
some tea.
Yeah.
Come on,
Yeah.
my people that look like me, you were chained in the bottom of the boat, but their lives were
Yeah.
not worth fighting for. But they
Yep.
was in harmony over that. Everything was fine. We're okay with that. But this tea, no taxation without representation. We going to American Revolution. And Crispus Attucks was the first one to die. Black man for some doggone tea. And so,
Yep.
so what I'm saying is, I guess to sum up everything that from my perspective, but I read your book, man. It's fascinating work. I encourage everybody to go out and read
Oh,
it. Uh, I thought you were gonna give them a direct thing to get it, because I know them
oh, yeah.
royalties
I can.
from Amazon ain't. Bro, I got
Yeah.
a $30 check from
Yeah.
Amazon.
Yeah. It's funny. I gotta say that uh, this what got to me. So bookstore. Now I made my book as cheap as I possibly can because I
Right.
didn't want price to be a
Issue.
deterrent for people. Yeah, and I realized it. So I did a book talk at a bookstore, and they purchased my books. They purchased 10 copies, right? I like, oh, I got 10 copies.
Right.
That 10 copies was $13.99. That's what I got from that. I was
Right.
like, okay, I'm doing this as a community. This is a community project now. This is not. You're not going to get rich selling books, right?
No, no. I mean, and I know you. That's not what is really. It's the message, but it sure helps sustain the movement when you
Well,
got
I
a
gotta
couple
travel.
coins. Yeah,
Gas
right,
gas is not cheap anymore. And I said I don't mind going to a location. And again, I've been blessed, right? I've been blessed in the fact that I've got to travel and speak to different folks. I like to go to areas that I like to target areas that I think I won't be welcome in, and
right,
that's where I'm, because I could, again. I can go to spaces that I know people going to agree with me. That doesn't do the work. I like to
Right.
go to areas where I know I'm gonna have some confrontation because that's what I'm interested in doing is engaging those minds, right? But it takes hotels. It takes, and this is the thing about all these any activists or any community organizers, you know, uh, it takes money to go to these spaces. It ain't like as a community activist we get a salary. But like, hey, listen, as a community activist, this is how much you get paid per. No. It takes not minus the time. It takes funds to get to location to location. But yeah, you're right. We do this work because it's a point. I would definitely put in there. I'll put in the chat real quick the my website to the sick mind of the same person. Um, and oops, I try maybe. Okay, I'll put it in the private chat. Then that helps because I don't think it's gonna let me.
It won't
It ain't
let
gonna
you
let me
in there.
post it.
I see.
Yeah, it won't let me. It said it was going to, but it's not gonna let me in there. So that's okay.
Hold on.
But
This is what I'll do. I want to make sure people uh, support this work because this book is fascinating. It's I'm saying it's that's the website
yeah,
strategiesjustice.com sick mind /sick mind.
it's fine.
That's
Yes,
strategiesjustice.com/sick mind.
yes.
And that way this book, I'm telling you, it changed the way that I look at things and just being engaging in this conversation. I'm sure everybody can hear his brother. His mission is to play on that improv, improvising on that fifth note, and
You
inspire
really
us
read the book.
to our high self, brother. Hey, yeah, as we say in the South, you put your foot in it. You put your foot in it, and you put your heart and soul into it. And I felt it coming off of the pages. And I just want to tell
Yeah.
you how moved I am by your
Uh,
work. You're not just talking about it. You're changing legislations. Hopefully, we could get this across America.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you what you're doing. The fact that you have this platform to allow us to speak on this topic. And I know the anti-racist work that you do too. And I think that the conversation about being able to hold spaces like this is so important because you know we can't we have to tell our stories, right? I love the proverbs you said. It remind I have a friend that signs off every email that way to know about the hunter and the lion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we get to the point where we understand the power of the lions telling their story and
Mm-hmm.
what that means, I think that's where we get to this progressive area. So
Man,
thank you so much, brother, for having this platform, and I really appreciate the time.
brother, I appreciate you for being here, and we'll stay in touch. And hopefully, I can get you back on so I can do my Shannon Sharp again and say, "Wow, wow, Skip, that was amazing." I'm telling you, man.
Yeah, you do a good. That's a good impression. That's a spot on impression, though. I gotta be honest, though.
Well,
Uh,
he from Georgia, so I know
uh,
people talk like that. And I love that brother what he doing. But actually,
I got
imitation is a form of flattery. So I hope that people
yes.
see it that way.
I am a fan of that show too. I've been watching. I haven't. I didn't start watching until the cat episode, like most of the
Yeah.
people in the country did. But now that I know it exists, man, I'm going back to the previous one
Yeah.
and watching it because he's. You know what I like about him though,
What's that?
as a celebrity is most celebrities that have shows, they like to talk over their guests and they like to trying to make it about them. You could tell he's authentic, trying to get their stories told. Right? He doesn't interrupt them. He lets them talk. He even allows space for pauses. Like it's refreshing to see a celebrity host space, truly host space for folks to have authentic conversation because you watching the other shows that they do, it's just like going back and forth and bickering and it's sometimes you can't even get content across.
Right.
So
And
yeah.
it's almost the contrast in well, good over, but the contrast is like when he said again when we talked about earlier when he
Hmm.
said being humble. He said,
Yeah.
I'm not a journalist. I'm not this." And I was like, I was so angry with him for saying that because, from
Yeah.
my perspective, I watched Larry King, and Larry
Hmm.
King would just lean there over the table, and he would let a person complete their thought. You know,
Yep.
that to me, that is journalism. What Shannon
That's
Sharp
exactly
is
what it
doing.
is.
The opposite of that is somebody like Bill Maher. He gets on the show, he do a monologue, and then the guest just sitting there in the way, and then he got to cut them off and tell 10 jokes, and then he
Yeah.
new rules. The show over, the guest just sitting there for an hour, like, bro, I ain't said nothing. So
Yep.
to me, to me, that's the art of it, and that's really what I try to do. But every now and then,
And
I'm a comedian at heart, so I try to get
well,
the jokes
no,
off.
you do your homework though, man. I mean, I know you read the whole book. Uh, you know,
Twice, 3,000 in one night.
I was like, because I'm here thinking about stuff because there's the hardest part of the book. Like I said, it was years of writing that I put together, and I cut it. I actually cut it in half. So half the book is really half of the book that I actually sent to the publisher. Uh, and I took stories. I moved them around to fit the chapters, right? And so I like to think of the hardest part for me is to figure out what, not what I said, but where did I say it in the book, right? And so when someone reads the book and like you did, and really was able to put it in like that was fantastic because I've been on shows before where I'm like, this person didn't read the book.
Well,
So I
let me get.
appreciate you, Bernard.
Hey, I appreciate you, but let me do this teaser because, like I say, I got, my notes is. Hey man, so maybe next time you come back, we explain the ask and KSA and the crawl, the
Yes,
walk, the run. Will you promise our viewers that aspect of it? Because it's a dynamic book, it's life altering, and hey
I
man,
got
you
it.
you you playing the fifth note.
Yeah, the ask and the crow walk run is what's making which is my workshops right now. It's really is what people is getting me to come and talk at this point. They want me to run down the crow walk run with them as a group, or they're saying, can you help us diagnose this? And so those two chapters by itself have spurred two awesome workshops. That the crow walk run is one is very popular right now. People are really enjoying those steps that I've outlined and walking them through those steps from invoking curiosity all the way to re-identifying the call, which is exactly what I want them to do. So absolutely, I could be back on and we can talk about that and what people could do from their own hometown. So.
And give your web series. How can people like and
Oh,
subscribe to that? Because these are
yes. The Moses people speak. Yeah, I'll tell you right now. And again, just like you were saying, I'm also the kind of person that's trying to um, when I have a guest on, I try to have them tell their story. And I give you an example. One of the people I interviewed, maybe about a year or two ago, was a brother by the name of Abraham Bowden, and he told a really powerful, powerful story. So I will put in the hold on, I'll put in the chat box. Let me I'll put in the chat box where people can go to.
And while you're doing that, I want to remind people to go to strategiesjustice.com/sick mind. That's strategiesjustice.com/sick mind. That's where you can get the book.
Oh, it's not, it ain't gonna let me post, is it? Oh,
You gonna put it in? Oh yeah, wait a minute.
wait a minute. Did
Yes,
it
it
do it?
did. Yes,
Did it come
yes,
as
it
a link
did.
though? It did. Okay, that's
Okay.
that's that's a messy link though. Hold on, let me just. That's messy.
Okay.
Well, I'm gonna give the clean version of this. So I'm gonna give the one that actually could be helpful here. But that didn't go through. But I put it in the
Private
same
chat.
thing at the end of NPS. Yeah, and this is the con. This show is I invite police officers, or mostly police officers, sometimes community members, to have a conversation about race and law enforcement. And we have had folks who have been killed by police, like their families that's been killed by police. And we also had folks who, police officers who have done some amazing things. Carrier Horn is a good example, but we also, this platform has become a space where when you have police, especially our brothers and sisters that's doing the right thing, and they're
The
being,
brother from Haiti. I didn't mean to cut you out, but the brother from Haiti is what, the New York 12?
oh
Who
yeah, 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 Lieutenant Edwin Raymond. Yes,
I
yeah.
love people from Haiti because they got that fighting spirit
Oh
about him. But that's very hard for him to do
yes.
in real, like you said earlier, stand up in real time. But I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, yeah, Edward Raymond, all of them. I mean, I love it. Edward Raymond. You listen to the last episode I just did with Keith Murs. He's out of Canada. But some of the other episodes, like we had Sergeant Zalakoffer, who was out of Maryland, who was being targeted by her department. We had the Baltimore Four on the four black sergeants in Baltimore that filed a class action lawsuit, and so this became a place for them to tell their stories
Mm.
and document it in a way that is authentic and it's told by us by us, right? And I think that again I was really moved by Abraham Bowden, who was the first black Secret Service agent assigned to White House detail. And when he came on the show to tell his story,
Hmm.
man, you can hear a pin drop. It was just as powerful as it gets. And so this platform really allowed me to show people outside of, because I do travel and do have conversations. This platform allowed me to put those people on the platform and be able to have these discussions. What I'm seeing now, which has been beautiful, is I'm seeing white brothers and sisters want to come on this platform and talk about race. And
Yeah,
I'm
that's
like,
powerful.
that's because when I first started doing this, I even the ones that were doing the work in race stuff was didn't want to come on the show, right? I mean, they was just like, no, I don't want to talk about race on the show. Yeah, that's changed. That's changed. And again, it started because a few people, brave folks who are doing the work in real time, the Carrios, the Corey Pagisis, and Damon Jones, and all those folks, Lieutenant Edward Raymond, they set the tone, and they said, you know what, I'm gonna be brave in the moment and not when it's later on. And I think,
Yeah.
and they all had some pushback, of course, but they did it anyway. And for that, I appreciate those police officers because those are the ones that really the ones we need to see in the community.
Right.
Yeah. But again, brother Bernard, thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's I'm gonna log off and then I'm gonna give my. I can keep you on while I do this though, but I'm gonna give my spiel. We thank everyone for tuning in with us. This brother right here, he's giving us inspiration and tools in order to help us be, components of equity. So
Yeah.
you can still follow his show at strategiesjustice.com/MPS. That's strategiesjustice.com/MPS. And that's for Moses People's Beat.
Yes.
Right, right. So we thank
Yes.
everyone for tuning in. If you like the content you see, subscribe. We're going to be coming with more content in the near future. I'm your host, Bernard Sims, and that was a wonderful guest, Brother Terry Lee Watson. Again, get his book, Welcome to the Sick Mind of a Sane Person. Wonderful
Yes.
work, and I read it in one night, and I just had all I can say is wow, wow. All right, thank you. Good night. That's my time. That's the way it is, and we'll see you next time.